Welcome back for this fourth segment. Remember, in segments 1, 2, and 3 in chapter 8, we were talking about everything was focused on the short run. We were only varying labor. We were keeping everything else fixed as far as our factors of production. Now we're going to shift to the long run. And production, talk about production choices and cost in the long run. In the long run, as I said, I guess it was in the last segment, fixed costs become variable costs in the long run. And we'll go through that and explain that in a few minutes. By changing fixed costs, the short run cost curves change. And in the long run, well, let's step back a minute. When probably in chapter 2, maybe, when we talked about firms and production choices, we went through firms talk about what to produce, how to produce them, for whom you're going to produce them. And then they talk about, and some texts don't mention, but I always like to get it out there, they're always looking at some reserves, because you've got to hold some resources back because you don't want to burn through all of them in the present, and not have some reserves that you hold back for future growth. And that's typically what you see firms, they will hold back some of their profits and call them retained earnings and kind of put them aside. And the long run decisions, and remember, in the short run, the decision of the firm was how much to produce and what price. Remember, we talked about those were the two decisions they made. And now in the long run decisions, because everything, you can vary everything because it is the long run. You're looking at how much capital stock to employ, what scale, what kind of overall size, expand the use of all factors of production, how much expansion, how much contraction. And it goes back to, again, the three pillars: the opportunity cost, the self-interest, optimization, and the decisions at the margin. And I think it was maybe in the first segment of this chapter, we talked about the taco truck. So in the short run, you may only have one taco truck, and the only thing you can really change is the number of bodies you wedge into that taco truck. And at some point, there's not enough room to even move around. So, but when you're in the long run, you're starting to think about, oh man, I've got doing really well on this one taco truck. Do I, expand to another, 2 or 3 taco trucks, or maybe I want, 4 taco trucks, or maybe I want 2 taco trucks and maybe open a restaurant. So these are all long run decisions that individuals are making, individuals in charge of the long run strategy of these firms, because at the end of the day, what is it that firms are trying to do? They're trying to maximize profits, and they want to ensure the longevity of the firm, and they want to ensure that as you go out over that time horizon, you're continuing to generate profits, and hopefully profits are increasing as you go out over that time horizon. So when you're sitting there, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 firm, you're trying to figure out, and you're trying to determine your long run strategy. And it becomes a situation where you're choosing the factor mix, or choosing the proportions of the factors of production that you want to employ. So it's a mix of proportion of the factors of production. Your margin of decision rule is a huge, or has a huge impact in these decisions, because again, you're trying to maximize long run profits, and you're trying to figure out how are you going to maximize those profits. You're trying to figure out what you're going to produce and how many. I think in the text they talk about, maybe this is where they talk about ski jackets. At one point they were talking about snowboards and skis, and ski jackets, and they keep shifting around from like one market economy to the other, but the concepts are all the same. You're as a CEO or the individual making these decisions, you're focusing on the how, and you're focusing on the what, and you're focusing on the how many. And you want the lowest cost blend of your factors of production, or the lowest cost blend of your inputs, because and I can't remember whether we've gotten there yet. That we touched on it in the past, but your profit is driven by total revenue and total cost. So to maximize that profit, one of those factors, you've got to maximize total revenue, but at the same time, you want to minimize total cost, because the lower your cost, or the lower the cost blend of those factors or input, the potential for a higher profit margin. Now, the blend causes output and production processes, or at least the output. The blend of your factors of production is going to have an impact on whether output increases or decreases. I think in the text they were talking about maybe Chinese street sweepers in Singapore, maybe. And they were talking about in the United States, things are more automated. So, you're looking at the blend of those factors of production. And it doesn't matter whether you're Starbucks, McDonald's, whether you're the entrepreneur that's trying to get the taco truck up and running. It doesn't matter whether you're a Fortune 500 firm. You're all looking. Everything is being driven in the same direction. You're looking at the potential output, the potential total revenue, and the potential for total cost. So you're trying to find that lowest cost blend of your factors of production, but you're also trying to find the maximum possible output for any level or any given level of total cost. Remember, we talked about in Chapter 7, the consumer has a budget line. Well, firms have budget lines too. They have budget constraints. They set aside an annual budget. Then if you've got equity investors and you've got, people that own stock in your firm, they're concerned about where you are with that budget and how you're staying within the budget parameters and how you're generating total revenue based on a given budget parameter. So let's start using that marginal decision rule. And so as you're in the long run, as you start to maximize, production and profits, you're going to do that. Again, marginal decision rule. You want to get to that point where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. And so in between that marginal benefit and marginal cost parameters, you can have the marginal product of capital divided by the price of capital. You can have the marginal product of labor divided by the cost of labor. You can have the marginal product of any of these factors of production divided by the price of that factor, so that you can have a complete stream. Because remember, we're in the long run. Everything is considered a variable cost or a variable factor in the long run. And if the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost, what does that give us at the end of the day? We maximize net benefits. You maximize output for your given level of money. So, and that marginal product of whether it's capital or labor divided by the price, it goes back to some things we've seen in the past where we were talking about, marginal utility divided by the price of a certain piece of a good or service. So you can have, I don't want to say an infinite, but you can have, as a firm, you're going to have several factors of production that you're trying to equate the marginal products of, and you're going to take and reallocate among these factors of production until you get them all equal. So, if the marginal product of labor divided by the price of labor is greater than the marginal product of capital divided by the price of capital, you're going to start reallocating dollars from capital over to labor until you get those two aligned. And it's the same thing with any of your factors of production. You want those marginal products of that factor of production divided by the price of that factor of production. You want them all to be equal, because at that point, it maximizes the output for a given cost, or it minimizes the cost for a given level of output, depending on how you want to look at it. And then the authors get into how do CEOs, how do CFOs, how do entrepreneurs, How do they respond to changes in factor prices? And think about minimum wage. I think it wasn't too long ago I read that in the fast food industry in California, they were bumping the minimum wage to, I don't know, something above $20, maybe $25. But you start bumping that minimum wage, what do you think that's going to do with the marginal product of labor at that point? Also, if you've got union contracts or there's changes in the supply and demand interaction and the equilibrium price in a particular labor market, especially in a particular regional labor market. If you think about, and we'll go back to a dairy farm. It wasn't too long ago I was raised on a dairy farm, so I understand what they were going through. But I saw a documentary, I don't know, probably 6 months ago, and they were talking about that the labor shortage on dairy farms had gotten to the point that everything was automated. They had robots milking cows. Cows came into the stanchion, robots milked them, cows left, next cow comes through, robot milks them, goes away. So you've got dairy farmers, switching to as much automation as possible. You've got, think about your physician's office, or think about the hospital that you may go to. They're now using electronic medical records. Everything's done on a laptop, done on an iPad. So you don't see the doctor come in. It's very rare that you see one come in anymore with a notepad and your medical record, and that physician's taking notes in there, and then takes and turns that over to somebody that walks it over to the business office, and they sit there with a pencil and paper and try to turn it into an itemized bill. Everything's going to the electronic medical record, and the information in there is fed into the electronic billing process, and that bill shoots out the door. And it's a much more automated, much more efficient system, because again, firms are trying to get to the point that they can equate the marginal product of capital, labor, some other factor of production. They want to get to the point that they are all equal, because at that point, marginal benefits are going to equal marginal cost. And so when we're talking about changes in factor prices, again, we'll go back to changes in the labor market, because we talked in, again, one of the earlier chapters, we talked about a price floor. What's a price floor? Minimum wage is a price floor. United Auto Workers are on a strike right now. What do you think that's going to do to the price of cars? UPS just settled a strike. Kaiser, Kaiser Foundation, the health plan, or the healthcare company, they were faced with, I don't know whether they've settled their strike yet or not, but they were, involved in a strike, recently. So all of these factors are going to change the price of a factor of production. That factor of production is labor. Think about COVID. Since COVID hit, and over the last couple of years, prices and inflation's gone crazy, and the prices of everything's increased. So what do you think that does to capital equipment that firms need? What do you think that does to the capital equipment that Meharry Medical Center there, right, across the street from Fisk? What do you think that does to the cost of the capital equipment that the CEO of Meharry may have been contemplating adding to bring into the hospital to I guess substitute for some of his labor that labor intensive services in the hospital? So there's a lot that's going on, because changes in we're going to focus on labor here for just a minute, but changes in the labor's marginal product per dollar. And again, it's similar to what we talked about with the consumers. So as the increase in the price of labor, let's say fast food labor in California, the increase in the price of labor, that ratio is going to drop, that ratio of the marginal product of labor. It's going to drop the ratio, because now the marginal product of labor is less per dollar spent. So, and it'd be the same thing with capital stock, or the same thing with any of your factors production. The price of that factor production, whether it goes up or down, is going to change that ratio. And remember, if it Go back to where we talked about ad nauseum. Just think of all of this in terms of ratios. If the price goes up, denominator gets bigger. As long as the numerator stays the same, as that price goes up, that ratio is going to get smaller. Price goes down, the ratio is going to get larger. So what you have with, if the change is in the price of labor, then that makes that ratio smaller, and you're going to start substituting and reallocating between labor and capital until you have them equal again. And the text, they talk about, capital intensive and, labor intensive. Capital intensive is a situation in which a firm has a high ratio of capital to labor. Typically in the United States, and a lot of your firms, it's a high ratio of capital to labor. Labor intensive is a situation in which a firm has a high ratio of labor to capital. Talking about the text, talking about the street sweepers in Singapore, I think it was. But these are relative, and these again, capital intensive, labor intensive, they're relative concepts, and depends on that marginal product of whether you're talking about labor or capital. One thing that individuals, especially early on in COVID, were concerned about was, what was COVID going to do to the labor supply in those countries that use labor that were considered labor intensive countries, because individuals were dying because of COVID. And not only was it taking labor out of the workforce now, out of the current workforce, but they were talking about what's the workforce going to look like in 20 years, where you had these adults that were dying because of COVID, and they weren't going to be there to provide any offspring to help replenish that labor supply. So that's where things, you start to see shifts. Even in those labor intensive countries, you're going to start to see shifts from maybe labor intensive to capital intensive. Not only is the total supply of labor going to be impacted or may decrease, but you've got people that, you see it here in the United States, they just decide they don't want to work. That there are, government subsidies that they think they can make more staying at home and not working. So you've got issues with the labor supply. Talk about this for just a second. When we're talking about cost in the long run, so remember, we talked about, cost in the short run. You had average variable cost, and you had the fixed cost that, they were truly fixed. Then when we're talking about changes and the cost, when we're talking about marginal cost, we're talking about changes in average variable cost and changes in fixed average, in fixed cost, total variable cost and total fixed cost. There was no change in total fixed cost because it was a fixed factor of production. Now we're in the long run, and there are no fixed costs in the long run. So total cost actually equals total variable cost, because there are no fixed costs. The function that we had, total cost equal total variable plus total fixed. In the short run, you had both of those costs, but in the long run, the total fixed cost disappears because everything at that point becomes a total variable cost. The long run average cost curve is a graph showing the firm's lowest cost per unit at each level of output. It assumes that all factors of production are variable. So if you look at a long run average cost curve, you're going to have just a multiple or many average total cost curves, especially if you're looking at a market. You're going to have a multitude of average total cost curves. All factors of production are variable. The firm has chosen an optimal mix of factors of production for any level of output. And I think all firms do. Now, some firms do it more efficiently than others, but all firms they're choosing a certain optimal, or what they think, or what their analysts think is a optimal mix of factors of production. And if you look at that, if you look at the long run average cost curve that they've drawn in the text, it's the lower envelope of all the short run average total cost curves. choices of output drives long-run average cost. Remember, choices of output in the short run, choices of output drove variable cost. In the long run, it's going to drive, and it actually drove average variable cost in the short run. In the long run, decisions on output is going to drive the long run average cost, because again, in the long run, there are no fixed costs. Everything is a variable cost in the long run. Firms operate efficiently in the long run if and only if they operate efficiently in the short run, which that makes sense too. If you're an efficient operator in the short run, in theory, you should be an efficient operator in the long run. And at this point, we're going to stop because I want to spend a few minutes just focusing on, we're going to jump into economies of scale in a few minutes. And I want to spend a little time on the economies of scale. So we're going to stop this fourth segment, and that will come back in a few minutes, and we'll wrap up chapter 8 with the fifth segment.